reenactors know you're out there. Fire them up. Give them a good round of applause. They'll give you a good spirited performance, but they always do. My name's Joe Roski. I'll be your host for the event. And my co-host here is Earl Foreman.
Oh, gosh.
You know, every year we worry about the weather. I think it was last year. It was Hurricane Earl. This year it's Hurricane Isaac. To forestall that, and apparently it worked, we had our own hurricane year, Hurricane Earl.
These are my friends. People don't like me talk even worse.
Anyway, folks, it's good to have you here again. Once again, we are here for what I would say is probably the most identifiable event in Wheeling history, Betty Zane's famous gunpowder run. A little bit of background about it. This was the siege of 1782, and the fort was defended by roughly 100 men, women, and children, and laying siege to them were roughly 240 Indians and 60 British Rangers. These Rangers were not neither British, but they were Americans. They were American loyalists. The battle begins with really, they've been expecting an attack. They know one's coming at some point or another. They don't know when. They have scouts posted out along the river, and one of these scouts is named John Lynn. And he sees something. He's probably 20, 30 miles deep into Ohio, and he sees something that curls his blood. He looks and he sees this huge column of Rangers and Indians coming toward the fort. John Lynn, where are you? Excellent. John Lynn runs to from Ohio. He's actually on horseback initially. By the time he gets to the river, he comes to the bank of the river, and he fires his rifle to let the people know that there is an attack coming. The people inside the fort, in turn, fire a cannon, and it's a signal that the Indians are coming. And I can see by the way the crowd's moving, the Indians were apparently very near at hand. The problem was when this battle started, the people didn't get very much notice. When John Lynn got there, what he told these people was the Indians were scarcely 2 hours behind. That gave them very little time to gather what possessions, livestock, or anything else they might have had. And that's what they had to get into the fort with. That's why you had so few defenders versus so many attackers. As we see them gathering into the fort, their first thoughts, of course, are to defense. According to the accounts, they filled every water vessel. They began casting bullets and making rifles ready to fire.
One of the advantages to Fort Henry, if you know where it was located, was on Main Street, just about across from where Kaufman sits, up towards where the Capitol now sits. If you're familiar with Wheeling, that will be a landmark for you. The west side of that fort, that would be the side facing Ohio, has a very steep incline that runs down to the Ohio River. And that was a source that was protected from attack. So their supply of water, which is critical, as you can understand, was available to them. But that was not the tail of the tape in 1782. The tail of the tape was in the hurry to fort up. That was the expression they used, to fort up. Not enough powder was in Fort Henry. Now you may ask yourself, if this is a frontier outpost between Pittsburgh and Holiday Cove, which is now known as Weirton, how come there wasn't any powder or enough powder in there? It's a reasonable question, and here's the answer. They stole it. People would come in to the fort who were part of the militia, and they would take the shot and the powder for their own use, because people hunted almost on a daily basis to supply food for their families.
Or whatever powder they have is what they're going to be stuck with. Look, the Indians are moving across the field here.
So the powder, to finish that story out, was 60 yards across the way at Ebenezer Zane's cabin.
It looks like the attacks commenced. They've obviously surrounded. These people have no way out. Whatever they're going to have to do, they're going to have to fight their way out.
I don't think they're going to leave that enclosure, do you?
Not if they have any sense. That was a old Indian device, was the feigned ambush. They would feign retreat. once they were buttoned up behind those walls, the frontiersmen were pretty safe. Once they got out, the advantage very much swung to the attackers. The Indians were still the masters of run and gun and open warfare.
You'll notice the Indians are not coming directly into the fort to batter the walls or the doors or to set fire to it. Not at this point.
One of the things that kept them at bay was a very unpleasant surprise for the Indians was the fact the fort had a swivel gun. In fact, in the real life thing, when they walked up and asked for a demand for surrender, really in a gesture worthy of the Alamo, they touched off a cannon. That cannon was a very unpleasant surprise for the Indians. In 1781, when they attacked the fort, they basically backed off because someone had put a painted log
Joe,
there.
the hay wagon has been moved. That can't be good news.
Oh, absolutely not. At this point, Fort Henry is constructed of 8-year-old, very dry logs. All these Indians really have to do, they don't have to have a cannon to batter down those walls. If they simply get flame to those walls, it'll go up. The fort will go up very quickly. They'll breach the walls, keep them inside, and they'll make short work of the defenders.
It looks like, for sure, we're going to use fire.
Well, fire is an ancient weapon of warfare, and again, in a wooden fort, if they get to fight into those walls, these settlers don't have much of a chance. But again, back to our story, the original history of it. When they fired that gun, that small swivel gun they had, it brought home a very unpleasant reality to the Indians. That was, these people had artillery. A very small artillery piece, but again, the Indians did not like being fired on by artillery. That was one of the few things they had a true aversion to.
During the battle, one of the Indians' attempts to counter the artillery was to hollow out a log over about where 10th Street is today, tie chain around it, and set it off. As you can imagine, that was not successful. It exploded their faces and killed several of them.
Where they got those chains was actually from to the north of the fort. The real life fort would have been up around where the Fort Henry Bridge is. There was a blacksmith shop there. By the first evening of the battle, they had taken the blacksmith shop, but part of the problem with taking the fort, there was a small, again, the blacksmith shop to the north of the fort. To the south of it, about where the Horns building is where Ebenezer Zane blockhouse was. Every time the Indians would come up and come close to the fort, they'd be raked by rifle fire on either side.
So they're feigning that retreat. Could you talk about that?
Oh, absolutely. Once again, the Indians look like they're trying to feign retreat. I can't believe they're going to give up that early. They're trying to lure the frontiersmen out of the fort.
The people in uniform, are they regular British soldiers?
No, they would be, again, British Rangers. They were, technically, they were American loyalists. They fought as light infantry. I don't know that it's militia. They were very much in the stripe of fighting men, and they were an excellent fighting force. They worked very well with the Indians in combination.
Well, they are retreating from what I can see at this particular time.
Part of the problem the British Rangers presented for the defenders of the fort, normally when the Indians would attack a fort, those attacks would only last one day. Normally the Indians, if they couldn't take the fort, too tough enough to crack, they'd move on. The problem is, at this particular attack, they have British Rangers with them. Because they have these Rangers with them, they will be double dog determined to take that fort. They will not give up.
They just got someone.
There's something occurring in the house to our left.
Is it possible they've taken captives? Oh, yes, they have.
Oh my goodness. Their fate is unknown. This could be a dangerous situation for the captives.
They got a woman?
They were often introduced into the Indian culture and raised in it.
Oh, apparently they've taken more captives from another blockhouse. I think he's calling for the captives to be brought forth. You know, the bad part about this was the Indians were very much masters of psychological warfare. If they had decided to do it, they might have burned a captive just out of rifle range to play on with the idea that the nerves, the screams of the captive would play havoc with the nerves of the defenders of the fort. something doesn't happen, there'll be a hard lot for these girls here.
They're being taken from the life they know.
It's most likely being that young, they would be kept as captives. But again, they face the danger of friendly fire. Oh, I think we're gonna get a demand for surrender here. Actually, during the battle, one of the Wyandots yelled to Jonathan Zane. He said, "Have you a brother among the Wyandots?" And he said, "Yes. Tell him his brothers are all here and ready to fight." Another very interesting parlay that took place, a lady by the name of Betsy Wheat was being chided by one of the Gertie brothers.
I'm dead. I have to charge the batteries tonight.
Anyway, this lady I was speaking about, Betsy Wheat, was being chided by one of the Gertie brothers, and he said basically, "I'll either be in hell, or I'll either be in the fort or hell by breakfast." To which she replied, "Then hell shall be your portion." It was a very gutsy call.
No surrender.
But these people behind the walls have no illusion about their fate. They've heard about what's happened to the people at Ruddle Station, who were nearly butchered to a man when the Indians breached the walls.
No surrender.
We fight to the last bullet. We fight to the last man. Folks, there you have it. No retreat, no surrender. I'd say, given the situation, those frontiersmen are taking a very dangerous chance coming out of the fort.
Looks like one of the captives is broken loose, Joe. The fort got in. Good. One less. Some young ladies have escaped. The young boy. They're being ushered into the fort. All right.
Not that it didn't happen in real life. It was an unusually brave and hardy person that escaped for the Indians. Very few did.
Well,
3 fewer for the Indians.
Well, their hostages are gone. They're going to have to take it.
they got
I take
one.
that back. There's people not here. They still have.
One more to go.
That tall Indian out there has her very securely tied to a captive strap. Once again, I think we'll have to be careful with friendly fire in there. I think this is a dangerous situation. Forlorn hope, too few, too many.
They don't have the firepower or the men.
An Indian chief very smartly remarked one time when he was about the British land to attack a superior force. He said, "You think we have enough?" And he said, "No." He said, "As a matter of fact, we are too few to win and too many to die." That's just what I think we have here. I see some movement out in the cornfield there. It looks like they're about to be
They're going to be caught in a
flanked.
crossfire. They don't know it yet, but they're going to be in a crossfire. The fort is calling out to them, but they cannot hear it because of the gunfire.
Well, again, this is what they call the fog of battle, the heat of war. Between the gunfire and the adrenaline in their system.
Do a run kick, go.
Course, KB.
Wisely, the defenders have gone back behind the walls.
So far, the defenders haven't taken any casualties, and I might point out in the real-life Second Battle of Fort Henry, I think there were only 1 or 2 people wounded. One of them was, of course, Ebenezer Zane's slave, Daddy Sam, who rather valiantly defended his blockhouse.
And may, in his own way, have saved Wheeling, because in the night they were going to fire on Ebenezer's blockhouse, and he was the only one awake, and saw the firebrand coming towards the house and killed the carrier.
Oh, absolutely. Daddy Sam was one of those secondary heroes. Betty Zane's brave deeds seem so called a lot of times that there's a slight loss that probably 2 or 3 secondary heroes were very brave in their own right. The first one, of course, we mentioned Betsy Wheat. Daddy Sam was another one who we'll get to in a minute. And, of course, the third one was Jonathan Zane. When they made the demand for surrender, Jonathan Zane delivered him a fire-eating speech. He said, "We couple the king's name with blackest insolence." Further went on, he said, "Is this a great and Christian king who makes war on his own subjects with heartless savages?" And after that, basically, Jonathan Zane delivered them the line to the last bullet, to the last man.
Jonathan Zane was the only person that Lewis Wetzel, the renowned hunter, would take with him.
Well, there's a reason for that. He was probably one of Lewis Wetzel's instructors. I think we've just heard a report of the cannon there. That's why the Indians and the Rangers are staying back. Of course, that cannon brought its own liability, too. It was able to keep the Indians and the Rangers at bay, but the problem is it had a rather lusty appetite for gunpowder. According to the actual accounts, it fired 17 times during the first evening and earlier day of the battle. And of course, about noon of the second day, the battle comes to a high point. They're out of powder in the fort. Uh-oh, look at this.
There she
I think Betty
is.
Zane's making, they're out of powder.
We're out of powder, and she must run to this other building that's approximately 60 yards.
In the real-life account, the Indians, at the first time, they laughed at her. There was actually very little firing going on. They simply yelled, "Squaw, squaw!" Well, I don't know what's going to happen here, but somehow they will define her mission, her true mission, and how essential it is to the fort. And when she comes across there, probably all hell will cut loose. According to the account, she probably ran across the sights of a couple of hundred rifles. It said the bullets fell around her so thick they cut her clothing. But miraculously, she makes it back to the fort.
She ran from where the entrance to the Capitol is approximately to where Horns now, or did, stand and back. And the Indians, by and large, wherever in the area where Kaufman's is and towards 10th Street,
Pictures or your videotape?
with the city of Wheeling.
Well, anyway, oh, here she goes.
There she goes. They're going to try to catch her.
Oh my, this is going to be close.
She was 16 years old and fleet of foot.
16 years old. Oh my. Shooting inside the fort. Let's hear it for Betty Zane.
Oh, that was cool. Had him back off.
Now with that, the spirits of these defenders inside the fort's going to raise. Now they're back in. They're rearmed, they're reloaded. They're ready to fight the Indians. During the, again, this would have been about noon of the second day. Other attacks will come. It was probably slightly after this, the Indians began to go frustrated. They tried to make their own cannon with a wooden log. They were frustrated because the cannon was keeping them at bay and they had no way to talk back to the people inside the fort. What they did was an Indian found some chains from the blacksmith shop that they had burned. They hollowed out a log, wrapped the chains around it with the idea that it would only have to fire one time to take down the gates of the fort. Of course, it proved to be utter false. The British Rangers tried to dissuade them from quitting their faces.
Joe
There we go.
Once again, we're resorting to an ancient weapon of warfare. Once again, if they just get flame to those logs, that fort will burn and burn quickly. back in 1999, when the battle was on the main field there, the Indian reenactors had succeeded with their real-life counterparts. It did not. They actually started Fort Henry on fire. Fortunately, they were saved by the Wheeling Fire Department, but that didn't exist in 1782. Earl, if that hay wagon makes it to the walls, it's
It was the cruise missile of its day.
I'll bet there's some people inside the fort there. Something about that. They're up close now.
They're close. They're close.
Those guys are in rifle range. The attackers better watch out. There's some sharpshooters inside those buildings.
I'm not sure they got to the walls with that.
Well, there's some rather intense shooting going on. Earl, how many times we've done this? What would Fort Henry be without fire and smoke?
It wouldn't be Fort Henry. It's like Campbell's soup with no Campbell's on it.
Trademark of the Fitzpatrick brothers. You see, it seems like the firing that's dying out among the Indian and the Loyalist forces too. Now again, remember, they were faced with the same supply problems that the frontiersmen were, in that they only had what they could carry. So they had to make their shots count, and they simply could not shoot endlessly either. The interesting thing here, I would propose to you folks out there in the audience, they probably fired as much black powder here as in the real-life Battle of Fort Henry. Again, when they failed to take the port, by the evening of the early morning of the third day, they decided they were going to try to take Ebenezer Zane's blockhouse. Everyone was asleep inside. Ebenezer's slave Daddy Sam was standing watching what he called his public musket. Sometime in the very early morning hours, an Indian approached the firebrand. He made it whirl, broke it into a flame, went to toss it, and Daddy Sam shot him. Now, in the roar of the rifle and the puff of the smoke and the darkness, he didn't know if he had killed the Indian, but he heard him scream and knew he very definitely wounded him. But the most important thing about this is that firebrand was laying outside where it could not do them any harm. That gunshot also alerted everyone in the fort. They were back at the walls, and probably their last major attack of the night was defeated.
We have a casualty.
Well, there's been a lot of shooting going on sooner or later. When you start putting that much lead in the air, it's going to catch somebody.
Seriously injured. But he may not be the fighter he was.
Now they're taking some inflating fire here from the blockhouse.
Skirmish at Ebenezer Zane's blockhouse that stood where Horns was located.
I think Daddy Sam just did his valiant defense right there. By the way, according to legend, or not so much legend, Daddy Sam died. He left very specific orders to Ebenezer Zane how he was buried. He said he wanted to be buried with his rifle, his tomahawk, and his snuff box. And apparently, from everything I could read, he was considered a hero in his time, and they gave him what you would consider a senator's funeral for its day. I see the Indians falling back and the British Rangers as well. I think there's some frustration setting in here, Earl.
It's almost reached a standoff.
Oh, I think it's gone beyond the standoff. They're emerging from the fort. They're about to drive the people that tried to ambush them early. They're going to do it right this time.
You know, it's always questionable coming out whether that's the correct thing to do.
I agree, but by this time, the Indians have shown their whole card. They know what they're facing.
They're being taunted by the Indians because they're out of rifle range.
They're trying to shoot them, but they're too far away. They're out of range.
Earl, I think the battle's over. I think they've successfully stood them off.
I do believe you're correct. Unless they have some other feints coming up, they are leaving the...
I think the Patriots mean to clear the field one time here. In real life, the battle was over about the morning. Reinforcements came in from beginning of the morning, the third day. The Indians and the Rangers began to melt away. Probably about 10 or 11 o'clock that morning, reinforcements came to Fort Henry from, they called it Catfish Camp, what we would think of as Washington, Pennsylvania.
We have one casualty. Fatality. Advancing American forces.
They've driven the Indians and the British Rangers from the field. They've taken the blockhouses. Let's hear it for our brave lads and patriots. If you brave lads are about out of gunpowder, would you like to come up and take a bow for your audience?
Now they're shooting to get all their gunpowder.
They're shooting to make sure that I'm going to go off.
Noble defenders of Fort Henry, would you like to step out and take a bow to your appreciative public? Defenders of the fort, would you please come out? An interesting thing, today we're reenacting the second siege of Fort Henry. A piece of trivia, today, September 1st, 1777, this is actually the 235th anniversary of the first siege of Fort Henry. The battle we're reenacting today would take place on September 11th, 1782. It was the first Wheeling Zone 9/11. Yes. Once again, let's hear it for the brave defenders of Fort Henry, the Patriot forces. Huzzah! 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 For the British Rangers. Huzzah! 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 And for what is undoubtedly the hit of the party every year, let's hear it for the Indians. Huzzah! Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the battle of Second Siege of Fort Henry, 1782. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for today.